In the shadowed corridors of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of protocol and quiet authority have long dictated the rhythm of the British monarchy, a single private confrontation has allegedly exposed deep fractures at the heart of the institution. What began as a seemingly routine request over a sensitive continuity briefing for the Princess of Wales quickly escalated into something far more revealing, a moment that, according to accounts, laid bare competing visions of influence, loyalty, and the future of the crown itself. Who truly holds the power to shape the path ahead when the next generation of royal duty is at stake? And what happens when an attempt to delay that path is met not with quiet compliance, but with firm, authorized resistance? If you're drawn to the hidden dynamics that shape the royal family beyond the public ceremonies and carefully staged appearances, subscribe now for more in-depth updates on the stories that rarely make the official headlines. Your support helps us continue exploring the layers of tradition, tension, and transition that define this historic institution. According to the accounts circulating around this episode, the central flashpoint occurred in a Buckingham Palace corridor, away from the eyes of the public and the formal schedules that usually govern royal movements. Princess Anne, long regarded as one of the most steadfast and duty-focused members of the family, is said to have stood firm against an effort by Queen Camilla to postpone a continuity briefing intended for Catherine, the Princess of Wales. The briefing itself, as described in these reports, was no ordinary meeting. It concerned the sensitive preparation of the woman positioned next in line for the highest responsibilities of the monarchy, a process rooted in the institution's long-standing emphasis on seamless succession and institutional readiness. Reports claim that Camilla had previously engaged in more subtle forms of interference. These included alterations to ceremonial placements that, while appearing minor on the surface, carried symbolic weight in a world where every seating chart, procession order, and access point can signal status and proximity to power. Access to certain information, according to the same accounts, had also been restricted in ways that limited Catherine's ability to engage fully with the evolving demands of her role. In the tightly structured environment of the royal household, such moves, if they occurred as described, would not have been casual. They would have touched on the delicate balance between the current consort's position and the growing prominence of the future queen. Princess Anne's intervention, the reports continue, was not a spontaneous personal clash. She is portrayed as acting with the direct authorization of King Charles, stepping into the role of neutral enforcer rather than partisan player. This distinction matters deeply within royal tradition. The monarchy has long relied on figures who can uphold institutional continuity even when personal dynamics grow strained. Anne's long record of service, her reputation for pragmatism, and her distance from the more public-facing rivalries of recent years positioned her, according to these narratives, as the figure best able to deliver a clear message. The continuity of the crown could not be delayed or obstructed by internal maneuvering. The confrontation itself is described as intense. In that corridor, Anne is said to have denied Camilla's attempt to put the briefing on hold. What followed, according to the accounts, was more formal still, a directive signed by the king himself. This document, the reports claim, mandated that there would be no further unauthorized interference with Catherine's duties. In the language of the palace, such a signed instruction carries institutional force. It is not merely a private request. It is an assertion of the sovereign's authority over the machinery of the household and the preparation of the next generation. Why would a briefing of this nature provoke such resistance? Within the framework of royal protocol, continuity briefings exist to ensure that those closest to the throne are fully equipped for the responsibilities that may one day fall to them. They are part of a broader tradition of preparing the heir, and the heir's consort not only in ceremonial knowledge, but in the practical, often confidential, workings of the institution. Any delay, especially one perceived as strategic, would therefore carry implications far beyond a single postponed meeting. It would raise questions about whether the path of succession was being managed in the interest of the monarchy as a whole, or in service of more personal calculations of influence. The accounts suggest that Camilla's actions stemmed from a sense of threat, specifically from Catherine's increasing prominence and her growing proximity to the future responsibilities of the crown. In a family where public visibility and institutional access have always been carefully calibrated, such feelings, if accurately reported, would not be surprising. The transition from one generation of senior royals to the next has historically been a period of adjustment, negotiation, and sometimes quiet contest. What is striking in this particular narrative is the claim that the contest moved from the realm of subtle positioning into a direct, authorized rebuff. A photograph is said to have marked the public breaking point. In the image, Anne is shown escorting Catherine into a room while Camilla stands behind. The composition, according to those analyzing the moment, signaled a decisive shift in visible influence. In royal visual language, proximity, positioning, and the order of entry have long conveyed hierarchy and favor. For observers attuned to these signals, the photograph did more than capture a routine arrival. It appeared to illustrate that the institutional priority had been reaffirmed around the Princess of Wales, with Anne acting as the visible instrument of that reaffirmation. The aftermath, as described, settled into a form of truce. Camilla retains her status as queen, the accounts emphasize, yet accepts that her capacity to obstruct the future course of the monarchy has come to an end. The language of truce itself is revealing. It implies not a complete resolution of underlying tensions, but a pragmatic cessation of active interference. In the closed world of the palace, such arrangements have precedence, quiet understandings that preserve outward unity while recalibrating internal power. Throughout this sequence, the role of King Charles remains pivotal. By authorizing Anne's intervention and then formalizing the directive, he is portrayed as choosing institutional continuity over any competing claim to influence. This choice aligns with a deeper royal tradition. The sovereign's ultimate responsibility is to the endurance of the crown itself, even when that requires restraining members of his own household. The fact that the directive is described as signed underscores the formality and the seriousness with which the matter was treated. What remains striking is how a private corridor exchange and a subsequent formal order could ripple outward into a broader realignment of influence. In the British monarchy, the smallest gestures, alterations to placement, restrictions on information, the timing of a briefing, can carry outsized institutional meaning. They are never merely administrative. They are statements about who is being prepared for the future and who is being asked to step back. As the layers of this account unfold, one is left to consider the careful balance the institution must maintain between personal relationships and the demands of continuity. The reports do not claim open warfare or permanent rupture. Instead, they describe a decisive moment of enforcement, a public visual marker of shifted priorities, and a subsequent acceptance of new limits. Whether this sequence will prove temporary or foundational remains outside the scope of the available accounts. What the narrative does make clear is that the preparation of the Princess of Wales for her future role was treated as non-negotiable, and that any attempt to delay it was met with the full weight of authorized institutional response. The story, as told, invites reflection on the quiet mechanisms by which the monarchy protects its own succession. In an era when public attention often focuses on spectacle and personality, the alleged events in that Buckingham Palace corridor remind us that the more consequential struggles frequently occur beyond the reach of cameras, until, of course, a single photograph or a carefully worded directive brings them briefly into view. The accounts leave us with a portrait of a family navigating the inevitable tensions of generational transition, using the tools of protocol, authorization, and visual signaling to reassert the primacy of continuity. Princess Anne's reported firmness, the king's signed directive, and the eventual truce together form a sequence that, if accurate, underscores how the institution prioritizes its long-term stability, even when that priority requires drawing clear lines within its own ranks. This is only the beginning of the story as it has been recounted. The full weight of the confrontation, the earlier patterns of interference, and the implications for the balance of influence inside the palace continue to unfold in the accounts that follow. The photograph that is said to have marked the public turning point did more than freeze a single moment in time. In the carefully choreographed visual language of the British monarchy, the image of Princess Anne escorting the Princess of Wales into a room, while Queen Camilla remained positioned behind, carried a weight that official statements could never fully capture. According to the accounts, this composition illustrated a decisive realignment of influence, one in which institutional priority had visibly shifted toward Catherine and the continuity of the next generation. Observers familiar with royal protocol have long understood that order of entry, physical proximity, and the presence of a senior royal as escort are never accidental. They function as silent declarations of hierarchy and favor, especially within the confined spaces of Buckingham Palace, where every gesture is read for meaning. What makes this particular image so consequential, the reports suggest, is the context that preceded it. The private confrontation in the corridor had already established that an attempt to delay the continuity briefing would not be tolerated. Princess Anne's firm denial of Camilla's request, delivered with the backing of the king's authority, had converted a potentially quiet administrative obstruction into an open assertion of institutional will. The subsequent formal directive signed by King Charles transformed that assertion into something binding. In the language of the palace, a signed instruction from the sovereign is not a suggestion. It is an order that reasserts the primacy of continuity over any competing claim to influence within the household. Yet the accounts do not present this sequence as an isolated clash. They describe a pattern of earlier, more subtle interference that had already begun to shape the environment around Catherine. Alterations to ceremonial placements, according to these reports, had adjusted the visual and procedural positioning of the Princess of Wales in ways that, while outwardly minor, carried clear symbolic implications. In a world where the arrangement of a procession or the allocation of seats at a formal event can signal relative standing, such changes are rarely neutral. Restricting access to information is portrayed as an even more consequential step. Continuity briefings and the materials that support them exist precisely to equip those closest to the throne with the knowledge required for future responsibilities. Any limitation on that access, the narrative implies, would have delayed not merely a meeting but the deeper preparation of the woman expected to one day stand at the center of the monarchy. Why would such measures have been taken? The accounts attribute Camilla's actions to a growing sense of threat rooted in Catherine's increasing prominence and her expanding proximity to the core duties of the crown. In the closed ecosystem of the royal family, influence is finite. As one figure's responsibilities expand, the relative space occupied by others inevitably contracts. The transition between generations has always tested this balance. Historical patterns within the institution show that periods of succession preparation frequently produce quiet contests over access, visibility, and the right to shape the narrative of the future. What distinguishes the present account is the claim that those contests moved beyond subtle positioning into a direct, authorized confrontation, and that the confrontation was resolved in favor of institutional continuity rather than personal preference. Princess Anne's role in this sequence is presented as that of a neutral enforcer rather than a personal adversary. Her long record of service, her reputation for unsentimental duty, and her relative distance from the more public rivalries of recent years positioned her, according to the reports, as the figure capable of delivering the king's will without the appearance of factionalism. In royal tradition, such intermediaries have often been essential. The sovereign cannot personally intervene in every internal friction without risking the appearance of open discord. By authorizing Anne to act and then formalizing the outcome with a signed directive, Charles is portrayed as choosing the long-term stability of the crown over any short-term accommodation of competing influences within his own household. The directive itself is described as unambiguous. No further unauthorized interference with Catherine's duties would be permitted. In the tightly regulated world of the palace, the phrase unauthorized carries particular force. It acknowledges that certain channels of influence may still exist, but it draws a clear boundary around any attempt to obstruct the preparation of the next generation. The continuity briefing that had been the immediate flashpoint was therefore protected not merely as a scheduling matter, but as a matter of institutional principle. Delaying it, the accounts suggest, would have sent a signal that the path of succession could be managed according to personal calculation rather than the requirements of the crown. The eventual truce that followed is portrayed as pragmatic rather than warm. Camilla retains her status as queen, the reports emphasize, yet accepts that her ability to obstruct the future course of the monarchy has ended. The language of acceptance is significant. It implies recognition of a new limit rather than enthusiastic agreement. In the history of the royal household, such understandings have often served as the quiet architecture that preserves outward unity while recalibrating internal power. The monarchy has survived successive generations in part because it has developed mechanisms for containing personal tension without allowing it to fracture the institution itself. Still, the accounts leave open the deeper question of what this realignment means for the daily workings of the palace. When a photograph can signal a shift in influence, and when a signed directive can formalize the protection of one royal's duties against interference by another, the ordinary routines of ceremony and access take on heightened significance. Every subsequent placement, every invitation, every sharing of information becomes potentially readable as either compliance with or quiet resistance to the new boundary. In this environment, the smallest administrative decisions can carry institutional weight far beyond their immediate practical effect. The narrative also invites reflection on the nature of threat itself within a family bound by both blood and constitutional duty. If Catherine's rising prominence was experienced as a challenge to existing influence, that perception itself reveals how closely personal standing and institutional role remain intertwined. The Princess of Wales is not merely a private individual expanding her portfolio of engagements. She is the woman preparing to occupy a position that will one day define the public face and private operations of the monarchy. Any attempt to delay that preparation, according to the reports, was therefore treated as an attempt to delay the future of the institution itself. Anne's intervention, the king's directive, and the visual marker of the photograph together form a sequence that the accounts present as decisive. Yet the truce that followed suggests that resolution, in the royal context, rarely means the complete disappearance of underlying tension. It means the establishment of clear limits and the expectation that those limits will be observed. Whether those limits prove durable, and how they will shape the relationship between the current consort and the future queen, lies beyond the scope of the available reports. What the narrative does make plain is that the continuity of the crown was treated as non-negotiable, and that the machinery of the palace was mobilized to protect it. As these layers continue to unfold, one is left considering how often the most consequential struggles within the monarchy occur not in public proclamations, but in the quiet enforcement of protocol, the careful management of access, and the occasional, carefully authorized reassertion of institutional priority. The corridor confrontation, the signed order, and the subsequent photograph are presented as successive moments in that process, each one reinforcing the principle that the preparation of the next generation cannot be subordinated to the calculations of the present. The story, as recounted, is not yet complete. The full implications of the realignment, the earlier pattern of interference, and the quiet acceptance of new boundaries still await closer examination. The sequence of events recounted in these accounts ultimately points to a quiet but firm reassertion of institutional priority. According to the reports, the private corridor confrontation, the formal directive signed by King Charles, and the photograph that publicly marked the shift together established a clear boundary. The preparation of the Princess of Wales for her future responsibilities would not be delayed or obstructed. Princess Anne's role as the authorized enforcer, and the subsequent truce in which Camilla retains her status while accepting the end of any capacity to interfere, are presented as the practical resolution of an internal contest over influence. What this narrative underscores is the enduring importance of continuity within the British monarchy. Even the smallest administrative decisions, ceremonial placements, access to information, the timing of a briefing, can carry institutional weight far beyond their immediate appearance. In a system built on tradition and succession, protecting the path of the next generation is not a matter of personal preference but of structural necessity. The account suggests that when that path appeared threatened, the machinery of the palace, backed by the sovereign's authority, moved to safeguard it. The story leaves us reflecting on how the royal family navigates the inevitable tensions of generational transition. Personal feelings of threat or rivalry, if present as described, are contained not through public confrontation, but through quiet enforcement of protocol and the clear drawing of limits. The truce that followed does not claim to erase underlying dynamics. It simply establishes that those dynamics will no longer be allowed to obstruct the future of the institution itself. Whether this realignment proves lasting remains outside the scope of the available reports. What the accounts do make plain is that the continuity of the crown was treated as non-negotiable, and that the tools of authorization, visual signaling, and formal directive were used to protect it. What do you make of this reported shift in influence inside the palace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective adds to the conversation. And if you want to stay informed on the evolving stories of the royal family, subscribe now for more in-depth updates.